Okay, today we are going to be talking about World War I and the events leading up to World War I. And I want us to think about this in the context of the history we've been studying. How does this war fit into the promise of the Enlightenment? We talked about Jeremy Bentham, remember, the utilitarian philosopher of the Enlightenment, and his hedonic calculus involved calculating the most happiness for the most amount of people. And yet, with World War I, it seems like we produce the most suffering for the most amount of people. You have a war that either kills or wounds 35 million people, and horrible, ghastly ways. People tangled up in barbed wire, fed into machine guns, gassed in trenches, pounded with mortar 24/7. How do we make sense of that? And what about individual rights? Wasn't the Enlightenment supposed to create a new political reality based on an individual's ability to determine their own happiness, to direct their own future, to find representation in government? And yet what do we have? Millions upon millions of soldiers marched to their death. And they don't have a word to say about it, because all of the authority is concentrated in the hands of a few generals. So that's the same sort of top-down model that, was the classic authoritarian model you would have had in the medieval or early modern period. So where are these rights? Marched to their deaths. So another thing about the Enlightenment was that its cosmology imagined a physical universe that was orderly, lawful, harmonious, and balanced. Remember the laws of motion and gravity that Newton described, and how Locke extracted an epistemology and a politics out of that. If we remember about Lockean epistemology, it is reasonable and it is cautious. It does not rush to any conclusion. It builds certainty little by little. And so how does that worldview and that philosophy end up to this mad rush to war and this rapid mobilization of violence? How does that make sense? Piggy's very noisy. So if you hear some grunting, it's Piggy. Piggy, 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 Piggy. Blame it on Piggy. Obviously, there are going to be economic factors that contribute to this war. But even that, if viewed through the filter of the Enlightenment, even free market capitalism, as understood by Adam Smith, should not have been this violent free-for-all, but tempered by human decency. In Locke, in his two treatises of government, that he also is talking about a temperate human nature, that even in regard to property and ownership and all that stuff that was important to Locke, private property and defining the rights of the individual in relation to this property, even he understood that human nature was ultimately temperate. So in two treatises of government, he writes, "The same law of nature that does by this means give us property, does also bound, meaning limit, that property too. God has given us all things richly, but how far has he given it to us? To enjoy, as much as anyone can make use of to any advantage of life before it spoils. Whatever's beyond this is more than his share and belongs to others. Nothing was made by God for man to spoil or destroy." So there are natural limits, and these limits are set by God, but they're also set by human nature, because we are inscribed in this physical universe that is good, and we therefore are unreasonable, and we therefore are good and reasonable. This is the principle of the Enlightenment. So we should understand that even though the Enlightenment, to a certain extent, secularized politics, the sense of moral order, the sense of principle and purpose that religion provided because it was instilled there by God and maintained by the church, they don't abandon that. It just takes a different form. And now that moral order and that moral purpose is going to be founded and guaranteed and anchored in the goodness of human nature. So even though we're talking about a new Enlightenment political culture that's secular, that tries to empty the political sphere of much of its religious content, we're going to find that the Enlightenment brings a new kind of sacred thinking or sacred ideology to politics, which is going to be nationalism and patriotism, which are not exactly flowing from the fonts of human reason. Nationalism is itself a product of the Enlightenment, right? The very idea of individual rights presupposes there's going to be some kind of a community to defend and protect those rights. And remember, Napoleon and his march throughout Europe spread these notions of national identity and the aspirations of self-determination far and wide in Europe. So we can take a look at this map here, and you can see everywhere that Napoleon went. He's in Germany, he's in Spain, he's in Italy, he's in Northern Europe, he's even marching into Russia. And this trajectory is actually going to be important because in the wake of his army comes this revolutionary aspiration that people crave self-determination. And this idea that a nation itself is what represents these rights, what defines, defends, and protects a people. So when we talked about the revolution in France, even though it sounded very radical at first, in the end it consolidated really bourgeois middle-class interests, just like the Civil War in England in the 17th century. So what do these bourgeois liberals want? They want free markets, they want to be able to represent their interests in government, so they want parliamentary democracy, they want constitutions to limit the power of government and ensure their own rights. So obviously voting's big, they want education, they want free markets. The place you're going to see this kind of liberal nationalism is going to be places where they want these things, right? Where they have a strong middle class with a strong market economy, lots of urbanization and industrialization. And this is going to be less appealing, however, to those parts of Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, that have not experienced this kind of urbanization, modernization that we've been following in Western Europe, right? So those cultures and economies are still much more agricultural and much more traditional. So when they internalize this nationalistic aspiration, this goal of self-determination, it's going to be along different lines. It's going to be along the lines of people sharing a common ethnicity, a common bloodline, a common language, and looking to the past really in terms of their shared tradition. So the point is, even though you have much of Europe that doesn't have the sort of economic infrastructure or urbanization or modernization to justify this sort of liberal nationalistic reforms, they're still tapping into this essential Enlightenment understanding, this new concept that the means of self-determination, the new means of dignity for the average person is going to be via the nation state, whether it's defined in liberalism as a community of laws and a constitution, or more conservatively as a people of the blood, a tribe, a language, a tradition. What about the people that are living under foreign domination, meaning those populations who are still trapped in an imperial framework, who do not live in nation states with parliamentary democracies and representative governments. The peoples of the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Austrian Empire, and parts of Italy, where they are subject to the rule of aristocratic monarchies that share no language, tradition, culture, blood ties with these people, and therefore people are beginning to think, how can they look after my interests? So they're not necessarily always looking for a democracy or a vote. Again, what they're looking for is self-determination in whatever form. So here's the map of Europe in the wake of the Congress of Vienna. You can see that there's all the old monarchies there, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, the Hohenzollerns, the Bourbons. You know, they're all continuing to rule over these subject people who've basically been awakened to a new form of political consciousness. And this is extremely problematic. If we look at, in the Austrian Empire, you've got Poles, Magyars, Czechs, Slavs, Serbs, Romanians, Croats, Slovenians, all there, all living, you know, within this vast expanse of territory ruled by the Habsburgs. And they're all, you know, pretty unhappy about foreign domination by this Austrian monarchy. Hungary successfully wins a degree of freedom from the Austrian Empire in 1867. It becomes the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a dual monarchy, so that they are essentially sharing power. But what about everybody else? The Serbs, the Slovaks, you know, you have an awful lot of unrest in the area of the Balkans. Okay, so if I'm looking at this map, of the Balkan region, it's where, you know, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Greece, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, you know, it's this whole area, Croatia, Serbia, and it's really a hotbed of ethnic tension. As the Ottoman Empire is weakening, it can't keep a lid on its ethnic minorities, so particularly the Serbs and the Greeks. And while these sort of communities are rebelling against, you know, Austrian and Ottoman authority and really destabilizing the region, you have, you know, the Russians standing by, sort of waiting to capture the Slavs or the Greeks in their own sphere of influence. And another factor that contributes to this intensity, of course, is the weakening of the Ottoman Empire. So they've got their own problems with ethnic insurgents, particularly the Greeks and also the Serbs. So we also have Italy, which is also a hotbed of political unrest throughout the mid-19th century. And, you know, it's eager to put itself together into a single country, the Kingdom of Italy, but for now, it's carved up into different regions. Some are autonomous, some are under foreign domination, like the French and the Austrians. So basically, you have a whole lot of insurgency coming, you know, up from below, and it is everywhere. But primarily in the less developed parts of Europe, in the East and parts of the South, where people's national aspirations were very thwarted and tamped down. We talked about this conservative backlash. I mean, they're still under these authoritarian regimes. So, you know, their dream is to have nationhood and, you know, all the other stuff, the vote, parliamentary democracy, that can come later. So there's one empire we haven't talked about yet, the Holy Roman Empire. We haven't mentioned it because it doesn't exist anymore. Gone. 1806, during the Napoleonic Wars, it crumbles. If you remember, the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, that is, you know, the eastern half of the Carolingian Empire we talked about. And that includes, if you look at this map here, you know, basically it's Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, parts of northern Italy. And it's a very ancient medieval state. And, you know, it disintegrates in 1806. And what emerges is the Austrian Empire, so that's the southern part of the Holy Roman Empire, and the German Confederation in the north. So Germany's not unified yet, but it is moving in that direction. And as it does, it is going to create a sinkhole of power in the center of Europe.